I took a screenshot of my husband's face on my sister's phone while he called her baby on video chat, and that single moment of ice-cold composure saved my entire life. My name is Vivian Cross, and I'm about to tell you how one Wednesday afternoon shattered everything I thought I knew about love, family, and trust. I had what most people would call a dream life. Corner office at a pharmaceutical company in Boston, a gorgeous apartment in Back Bay with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows, and a husband who still kissed me goodbye every morning after 6 years of marriage. Marcus was a financial consultant, charming, ambitious, the kind of man who remembered anniversaries and brought me coffee in bed on Sundays. My little sister Sloane had been living with us for 8 months. She'd lost her marketing job in New York and needed time to get back on her feet. I didn't hesitate to take her in. We'd been close our whole lives, sharing secrets and dreams since we were kids building blanket forts in our childhood home in Connecticut. That Wednesday, I left work early. Rare for me, but I had a headache that wouldn't quit. Marcus was at a conference in Chicago, not due back until Thursday night. The apartment should have been empty. Sloane had mentioned something about going out with friends. I walked into my bedroom to change, and that's when I saw it. My sister's phone, on my pillow. Screen glowing. The first strange thing was that it was there at all. Why would Sloane leave her phone on my bed, practically attached to that thing? The second strange thing was that the screen was lit up with an active video call. And the third strange thing, the thing that made my heart stop and the world tilt sideways, was that the face on that screen was my husband's. Marcus was lying on a hotel bed, shirtless, smiling that intimate smile I thought belonged only to me. His voice came through the speaker, warm and affectionate. Coming back. I miss you already. I stood frozen, holding my sister's phone in my trembling hands, watching my husband's lips move as he spoke words of longing to someone who wasn't. Then I heard from my bathroom, Sloane's voice, sing-song and happy. Just a few more hours, love. I'm almost ready. Can't wait to see you. My sister was in my bathroom, getting ready to fly to Chicago to meet. Something inside me just tipped off. Pain would come later. I knew that, but in that moment, there was only crystal clear Arctic clarity. I didn't scream. Didn't cry, didn't confront. Instead, with hands that barely shook, I took screenshots. Multiple screenshots. Marcus's face clear as day, the date and timestamp visible, the hotel room background sharp in the frame. Evidence? Irrefutable. Digital evidence. Then I placed the phone exactly where I'd found it and walked out of my bedroom as quietly as I'd entered. This is a long story, and I need someone to walk through it with. If you want to know how I turned that single moment of into the weapon that saved my life and destroyed theirs, if you want to hear every calculated move I made while they thought I was clueless, follow along here, because what happened next was the most strategic, devastating, and liberating thing I've ever done. And trust me, they never saw it coming. I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes to fall apart. After leaving the bedroom with those screenshots burning in my phone, I walked straight to my home office and locked the door behind me. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely turn the deadbolt. The moment that click echoed in the silence, something inside me cracked wide open. I slid down against the door and let the tears come, silent, violent sobs that made my whole body convulse. I pressed my fist against my mouth to keep from making noise, because Sloane was still in my bathroom, probably doing her makeup, getting pretty for my husband. The thought made bile rise in my throat. My sister, my baby sister who I'd protected from bullies in middle school, who I'd helped move into her first apartment, cried on my shoulder when her last boyfriend broke her heart. And Marcus, the man who'd proposed to me on a beach in Cape Cod, who'd held my hand through my father's funeral, who'd promised before God and everyone we knew to love me and only me. They'd both looked me in the eye every single day and lied. I set a timer on my watch. 5 minutes. That's all I'd give myself for this breakdown because I had a feeling, a cold, certain knowing, that if I wanted to survive this, I needed to think emotions could come later. Right now, I needed strategy. When the timer buzzed, I stood up, walked to my bathroom sink and splashed cold water on my face, looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red and swollen, mascara smudged down my cheeks. I looked destroyed. Good. I needed to remember this face. This was the last time I'd let them reduce me to this. I cleaned myself up, reapplied concealer, and did what I do best. I went into problem-solving mode. My mind was already racing. How long had this been going on? Were there others? Had they been intimate in my bed? But the question that kept circling back was more practical. How do I protect myself? I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Rachel Kim's contact. Rachel and I had been friends since our freshman year at Boston University. She was now a family law attorney at one of the best firms in the city. Sharp, ruthless when needed, and someone I trusted. My finger hovered over her name for just a second. Once I made this call, there was no going back. This became real, official. I pressed dial. She answered on the second ring, her voice professional but warm. I could hear she was in her office, the familiar sound of papers shuffling in the background. I told her I needed to see her immediately, that it was urgent, that it needed to stay completely confidential. Rachel's tone, she told me to give her 20 minutes, that she'd come to me, and to send her my address. She also said something that made me start breathing again, that whatever happened, we'd handle it together. I texted her my building's service entrance code. The last thing I needed was for Sloan to see a lawyer walking through my front door. While I waited, I forced myself to think like the operations director I was at work. What did I know? What did I need to find out? What resources did I have? I knew Marcus was in Chicago until tomorrow. I knew Sloan was about to leave for the airport. Probably had a ticket for a flight to Chicago this evening. I knew they'd been communicating somehow, planning this right under my nose. What I didn't know was how deep this went. How long? How many lies I'd swallowed like poison without even tasting them. I heard movement in the hallway. Sloan's footsteps, quick and light. She was humming something, actually humming, as she passed my office door. I heard her rolling suitcase bump against the wall. Then her voice, calling out brightly that she was heading out, that she'd see me Sunday night, that she loved me. The words hit me like acid. She loved me. Sure. I waited until I heard the front door close and lock. Waited another full minute to be sure she wasn't coming back for something she'd forgotten. Then I moved to the window and watched her climb into an Uber, her small weekend bag in hand, off to meet my husband. That's when the second wave hit me. Not sadness this time, but pure, cold rage. Rachel arrived 18 minutes later, slipping in through the service entrance like I'd asked. When I opened the door, she took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. I let her hold me for exactly 10 seconds before I stepped back and told her we needed to work. I showed her the screenshots first, watched her face go from confused to shocked to absolutely furious. She asked me to send them to her phone immediately. We needed backups, she said, multiple backups. Then I told her everything. The timeline. Sloan living here for 8 months. Marcus's frequent business trips. The way they acted so normal around me. So loving. Such good liars. Rachel sat on my couch with her laptop already open, her legal mind processing everything at lightning speed. She started asking questions. Sharp, specific questions about assets, accounts, property ownership. That's when it hit me that this wasn't just about betrayal. This was about protecting everything I'd built. Rachel asked about the apartment. I told her it was in my name only. I'd bought it 2 years before Marcus and I even met, with money from a trust my grandmother had left me. He'd moved in after the wedding, but his name was never added to the... She asked about our bank accounts. Joint checking, I said. That was it. Everything else, my savings, my investment accounts, my retirement, I'd kept separate. My grandmother Eleanor had insisted on a prenuptial agreement before the wedding, something that had caused a huge fight at the time. Marcus had been hurt, said it showed I didn't trust him. God, Grandma Eleanor had known. She'd died 3 years ago, but somehow she'd known to protect me. Rachel's fingers flew across her keyboard. She told me we needed to look at that joint account right now. Needed to see if there were any financial irregularities, anything that could help us understand what we were dealing with. I logged into our bank account on my laptop and turned the screen toward her. That's when we found it. Regular transfers to Sloan. Started 9 months ago, right before she moved in with us. Amounts ranging from $500 to $2,000, sometimes twice a month. One had a vague description. Family help. Loan for S birthday gift. I counted them with Rachel looking over my shoulder, her jaw getting tighter with each line item. $34,000. Marcus had transferred $34,000 of our money to my sister over 9 months. Rachel's hand covered mine as I stared at that number. My vision was blurring. That was our money. Money I'd earned. Money for my salary, my bonuses, my work. He'd been funding their affair with my money, but Rachel wasn't. She scrolled down further, looking at charges rather than transfers. And there they were. Hotel charges. Luxury hotels, the Ritz in Chicago, the Four Seasons in New York, a boutique hotel in Portland I'd never heard of. I grabbed my phone and opened my photos, started scrolling back through my calendar. Every single weekend that Marcus was visiting clients or attending conferences, There was a hotel charge, and when I thought back, really thought back, those were the same weekends Sloan had been away too. Visiting friends, she'd said, girls' weekends, family in Connecticut. They'd been together. Every single time. Rachel closed the laptop and looked at. She said we had everything we needed for a divorce case, that with the evidence of infidelity and financial misappropriation, Marcus wouldn't get a penny of my assets, that the prenup I'd signed would protect me completely since he'd violated it through adultery. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. She asked me what I wanted to do about Sloan. I realized I hadn't thought that far. My sister, my own sister, there was no legal recourse for what she'd. You can't sue someone for sleeping with your husband, for betraying you, for living in your home while destroying your life. But I could make her face what she'd done. I could make them both face it. Rachel must have seen something change in my expression because she leaned forward and fully about my next moves. That anger was useful, but revenge could backfire. That the goal was to protect myself and come out of this hole. I told her I understood. But what I didn't, what was crystallizing in my mind as we sat, was that I wasn't interested. I was interested in making absolutely sure they never, ever saw me as the naive fool they'd been laughing at. Rachel started outlining next steps. Change passwords, secure funds, document everything. But I was only half listening because my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, a photo of his hotel room window, view of Chicago's skyline at sunset. The message underneath said he missed me and couldn't wait to get home tomorrow. I showed Rachel the text without a word. She looked at me and asked what I wanted to do right now, tonight. Well, I had this window before they both came back, and I had to face them. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I needed to find out how deep this really went. I needed to know if this was, or if they'd been planning something even worse. Because something Rachel said had stuck with. The transfers had started 9 months ago, right before Sloan moved in. What if this whole thing had been planned from the beginning? Rachel left around midnight, but not before making me promise I'd call her if I found anything else. After I locked the door behind her, I stood in my silent apartment and felt the weight of what I was about to. I was going to invade my husband, going to dig through his digital life. Like a year ago, the thought would have made me sick. I'd always believed in trust, in respecting, but that version of me died the moment I saw his face on my sister's phone screen. Marcus's laptop was in his home office, the small second bedroom we'd converted into a workspace. I'd never snooped before, never had a reason to, didn't even know his passwords. Except I did. 3 years ago, Marcus had asked on his computer while he was in the shower. He'd told me his password then, and I'd noticed it was the same one he used for everything. The date we first met, followed by our initials. Back then, I'd thought it was romantic. Now, it just seemed arrogant. He'd never imagined I'd use it against him. I sat down at his desk and opened the laptop. My hands were steadier now, the initial shock giving way to something colder and more focused. The screen lit up with his lock screen, a photo of us from our honeymoon in Santorini, both of us laughing, the Mediterranean sparkling behind us. I typed in the password. It worked. His email loaded automatically, thousands of messages organized into folders. Work, personal, family. I clicked on personal first, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. I searched for Sloan's name, 473 results. I felt like I'd been 473 emails between my husband and my sister. I clicked on the oldest one, hands trembling again. The date was from 13 months ago, a month before Sloan lost her job and moved to Boston. The subject line was simple, checking in. In the email, Marcus told Sloan he'd been thinking about her after running into her at our cousin's wedding, that she'd looked beautiful that night, that it was nice to catch up and talk without everyone else around, that maybe they could grab coffee next time he was in New York for work. I remembered that wedding. It was in Greenwich, Connecticut. Marcus had danced with Sloan twice. I'd thought it was sweet. My husband getting along with my sister. I'd even taken a photo of them together and posted it on Instagram with some stupid caption about family. I wanted to throw the laptop across the room. Instead, I kept reading, scrolled through the messages chronologically, watching their relationship unfold like a horror movie I couldn't turn off. The email started innocent enough. Coffee meetups, lunch when he was in the city, Sloan confiding in him about her relationship problems. Her boyfriend at the time was emotionally unavailable, apparently. Marcus playing the sympathetic ear, the supportive brother-in-law. But by the 3rd month, the tone shifted. The messages got longer, more personal. Marcus started sharing things about our marriage. How I was always working, how he felt like we'd grown distant, how he missed feeling desired. I had to stop reading and breathe. He'd been complaining about me to my sister. building intimacy with her by tearing me down. Sloane's responses were perfectly calibrated. She understood him, she said. She'd always thought he deserved someone who appreciated him more, someone who made time for someone like, and then she'd trail off, let the implication hang there. The first "I love you" appeared 6 months before she moved in. Marcus had written it after they'd apparently spent a weekend together in New York, while I was at a pharmaceutical conference in San Diego. He told Sloane she made him feel alive again, that being with her was like breathing for the first time in years. I remembered that conference. I'd texted Marcus constantly, sent him photos of the presentations, called him every night before bed. He'd seemed perfectly normal, loving even. Told me he missed me and couldn't wait for me to come home. He'd been with my sister the entire time. Emails got more explicit after that. Plans for meetups, hotel reservations, photos I had to click away from because seeing them would break something in me I wasn't ready to break yet. But it was the emails from 3 months ago that made everything click into place. Sloane had written to Marcus worried. She was running out of savings. Couldn't keep flying back and forth to see him. She missed him constantly. She hated pretending to like me when all she wanted was to be with him. Marcus's response came 4 hours later. He had an idea. What if she moved to Boston? She could stay with us temporarily. I'd never say no to helping her out. It would be perfect. They could see each other all the time, right under my nose. And he'd help her financially until they figured out their next move. Like I was just an obstacle to be dealt with eventually. Sloane had been hesitant at first, worried I'd catch on. But Marcus had reassured her. I was predictable, he'd written. I trusted too easily. I'd never suspect my own sister. 3 weeks later, Sloane had called me crying, telling me she'd been let go from her job and didn't know what to do. I'd immediately offered our guest room, had helped her pack up her apartment over FaceTime, had driven to New York myself to help her move to Boston. I'd delivered my sister straight into my husband's arms. The rest of the emails were a timeline of their affair happening in my home, references to afternoons when I was at work, Marcus leaving conferences early to meet her, the two of them in my kitchen, my living room, probably my bed while I was building my career and trusting them both. I found an email from 6 weeks ago that made my stomach turn. Sloane had asked Marcus when they were going to stop pretending, when he was going to leave me so they could be together for real. Marcus's response was calculated and cold. He needed to be strategic about it, he'd written. If he filed for divorce without cause, the prenup meant he'd walk away with nothing. But he'd been documenting things, my long work hours, how I prioritized my career over him, how we barely had sex anymore. He was building a case for emotional abandonment. And in the meantime, he was moving money around, setting up accounts I didn't know about, preparing for the split. He was planning to leave me, but only after he'd squeezed out whatever financial advantage he could get, only after he'd made me look like the bad guy, the workaholic wife who'd neglected. The affair wasn't just about passion or forbidden love. It was calculated. They'd both been using me. I sat back in the desk chair, my whole body numb. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the laptop and the distant sound of traffic from Boylston Street below. It was almost 2 a.m. Somewhere in Chicago, Marcus and Sloane were probably together right now, probably in bed, probably laughing about how clueless I was. But I wasn't clueless anymore. I took out my phone and started taking pictures of the emails. Every single damning one. The timestamps, the planning, the financial manipulation, the mockery of me. I created a new cloud folder and uploaded everything. Sent copies to Rachel's encrypted email. Then I dug deeper. Checked his bank account history, the one I didn't have joint access to. He'd been sloppy, left himself logged in on the laptop. There it was. A separate account I'd never known existed. He'd been siphoning money from our joint account into this private one for months. Small amounts at first, then larger transfers. Over $60,000 total. He was stealing from us while funding his affair with my sister. I documented all of it. Screenshots, photos, PDF exports. I was methodical, thorough. This was evidence. This would protect me. But then I found something that changed everything. In a folder marked Personal Private, there was a document. A Word file titled Exit Strategy. My cursor hovered over it for a long moment before I clicked. It was a plan, a detailed step-by-step plan for how Marcus was going to leave me. He'd outlined his timeline, 6 more months of living in my apartment, using my connections, building his client base with people I'd introduced him to at events. He'd listed assets he thought he could argue for in the divorce. Furniture we'd bought together, wedding gifts, even trying to make a case for shared equity in my apartment by claiming he'd contributed to renovations. Every contribution was fabricated or exaggerated. The kitchen renovation he'd paid for, that was my money. The living room furniture, my money. Everything was my money because he'd barely contributed financially to our household in the last 2 years, claiming he was building his business. But the worst part was at the bottom of the document, a section titled Sloan Transition. He'd written out how after the divorce was finalized, he'd wait 6 months before publicly dating Sloan. Long enough that it wouldn't look suspicious, that I couldn't claim the affair as grounds. They'd tell people they'd grown close after supporting each other through hard times. That love had found that they were going to rewrite history, make themselves the victims of circumstance instead of the architects of my And there was a final note at the end that made me close the laptop before I smashed it. He'd written, V is so focused on appearances in her career, she'll probably be relieved, might not even fight it. She'll want a quiet divorce to avoid embarrassment. This could actually be easy. I stood up from the desk, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water with shaking hands. Drank it down, poured another. He thought I'd make this easy for him, thought I'd go quietly to avoid making a scene. He'd made the biggest miscalculation of his life. Because I wasn't going to give him a quiet divorce. I wasn't going to let them rewrite this story. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let him steal another cent from me. I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts. Scrolled past friends and colleagues until I reached the name I needed. Mom. Eleanor Cross was a retired corporate attorney who'd built a career on being smarter and tougher than everyone else in the room. She'd raised me and Sloan alone after our father died when I was 12. She was formidable, principled, and she did not tolerate lies. I looked at the clock. 2:30 in the morning. She'd be asleep at her home in Hartford. But this couldn't wait. I pressed dial. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice groggy but alert, the kind of alertness that comes from decades of emergency calls and crisis management. She asked what was wrong. I told her I needed her in Boston tomorrow morning, that I needed her and Uncle James, my mother's brother, a retired judge and tax attorney who now consulted for high-profile cases, that it was urgent and I couldn't explain over the phone. My mother didn't ask questions. She heard something in my voice, the same tone she'd probably heard hundreds of times from clients facing career-ending lawsuits. She told me she'd be there by 9 a.m. and would bring James. After I hung up, I sat on my couch and let myself feel it all. I thought I had, and the sister I thought I knew, all of that was something harder and colder than anything I'd felt before. They'd underestimated me. Thought I was too nice, too naive, concerned with keeping the peace to fight back. Tomorrow, they'd learn exactly how wrong they were. My mother and Uncle James arrived at exactly 9 a.m., both looking sharp despite the early hour and the 2-hour drive from Hartford. Mom was in one of her power suits, navy blue, perfectly tailored, and Uncle James carried his leather briefcase like he was heading into a courtroom. I'd spent the night printing documents, every email, every bank statement, every piece of evidence I'd found. They were organized in 3 binders sitting on my dining table like exhibits in a trial. Mom took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. I let myself sink into it for exactly 5 seconds before pulling back. There'd be time to fall apart later. Right now, I needed her lawyer brain, not her mother heart. Uncle James sat down and started reading through the binders methodically, his expression getting darker with each page. My mother stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. When they got to the exit strategy document, Mom's hand flew to her mouth. The word she whispered when she saw Sloan's name was one I'd never heard her use before. Uncle James was more clinical. He pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. After 20 minutes of silence broken only by turning pages, he looked up at me and told me I had an airtight case. The prenup would hold. Marcus's infidelity voided any claims he might have made. The financial misappropriation was documented and traceable, and the separate account he'd been hiding could potentially be considered fraud. But then he asked me the question I'd been dreading. What did I want to happen? I'd thought about this all night. Part of me wanted to destroy them both publicly. Wanted to send those emails to every person we knew. Wanted to post the evidence on social media and watch their reputations burn. But that would make me look unstable. It would turn crazy ex-wife in everyone's story. What I wanted was simple. I wanted Marcus to sign away I wanted him out of my apartment and my life with nothing but the clothes on his back. I wanted every cent he'd stolen returned. And I wanted to do it all before he even realized he'd lost. Uncle James smiled. The first time I'd seen him smile all morning. He told me that was smart, that we had all the leverage, that Marcus would sign whatever we put in front of him once he understood the alternative was a criminal investigation for financial fraud. Mom asked about Sloan. Her voice cracked when she said that there was no legal action I could take against my sister, but I could make sure she faced the consequence every other way that mattered. We spent the next 3 hours building the strategy. Rachel arrived at noon with divorce papers already drafted. Uncle James reviewed them, made some additions. The terms were brutal and non-negotiable. Marcus got nothing, paid back everything, and left immediately. The plan was simple. Marcus was due home at 6 p.m. Sloan would arrive around 6:30. Her flight from Chicago landed at 5. We'd confront them together, here in my apartment, with witnesses present and documents ready. No screaming, no drama, just cold, hard facts and signatures on paper. The afternoon dragged. I couldn't eat, couldn't sit still. Rachel made me drink water and reminded me to breathe. Mom kept checking her watch. Uncle James reviewed the papers one more time, making sure we hadn't missed anything. At 5:45, my phone buzzed. Marcus texting that he'd landed and was grabbing an Uber, that he couldn't wait to see me, that he'd missed me so much. I didn't respond. At 6:03, I heard his key in the lock, the sound of his rolling suitcase, his voice calling out my name in that familiar, affectionate way. I took a deep breath and walked into the living room. Mom and Uncle James were already seated on the couch. Rachel stood by the window. Marcus froze when he saw them. I watched confusion cross his face, then the first flicker of fear. He asked what was going on, his voice trying to stay casual but failing. I told him to sit down, that Sloan would be here soon, that we needed to have a family conversation. The color drained from his face. He knew. I saw him realize that somehow, possibly, I'd figured it out. He was a good liar. He'd had practice. He tried to recover, asked again what this was about, why my family was here. Before I could answer, Sloan, using her key, pulling her weekend bag behind her. She was glowing, radiant, probably still high on her stolen time with my husband. She stopped dead when she saw everyone sitting there. Her eyes found Marcus first, then me, then our mother. I told them both to sit down. Marcus tried one more time to take control. Started to say something about this being inappropriate, about ambushing him after a long trip. That's when I opened my laptop, turned it so they could both see the screen. And I started the slideshow I'd prepared. The first image was the screenshot from Sloan's phone, Marcus's face, the timestamp, the hotel room. The second was a bank statement showing the $34,000 in transfers. The third was an email where they'd laughed about how predictable I was. I didn't say a word, just let the images speak for themselves. Click after click after click, their affair laid bare in high-definition digital evidence. Sloan started crying after the fifth slide. Marcus had gone completely white, his hands gripping the chair arm so hard his knuckles had turned bloodless. When I reached the final image, his exit strategy document with that last cruel note about how easy I'd make it for him, I finally spoke. I told them I knew everything. Every lie, every hotel, every stolen dollar, every moment they'd betrayed me under my own roof. And then I told Marcus exactly what was going to happen next. Marcus tried to speak first. His mouth opened and the excuses started tumbling out. It wasn't what it looked like. I was misunderstanding. He could explain everything if I just give him a chance. I held up one hand and his voice died mid-sentence. I told him he'd had six years of mornings when he could have chosen on 6 years of nights when he could have ended our marriage with dignity instead of bleeding me dry while those days. Rachel stepped forward with a folder in her hands. She introduced herself formally as my attorney, and I watched Marcus's face shift from panic to something closer to calculation. He was trying to figure out his options, trying to remember what the prenup said, trying to find a way out. There wasn't one. Rachel opened the folder and began reading the clear, professional voice. Marcus would sign the divorce papers tonight with witnesses present. The grounds were adultery and financial misappropriation, which voided every provision in the prenuptial agreement that might have protected him. He would receive nothing. No claim to the apartment, no shared assets, no furniture, nothing. He had 48 hours to remove his personal belongings from my home. The $63,000 he'd moved into his private account would be returned within 7 business days. The $34,000 he'd transferred to Sloan would also be. We didn't care which of them paid it, but it would be paid in full within 30 days. Refused to sign, we'd file criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement of marital funds. Uncle James leaned forward at this charge instigation, the trial, the very public nature of it all, how it would destroy his consulting business when his clients discovered he'd been stolen wife. Marcus looked like he might be sick. He turned to Sloan, maybe expecting support or sympathy, but she was staring at the floor, tears streaming down her face. He asked if he could speak to a lawyer. Uncle James told him absolutely. He had every right to legal representation, but he should know that every hour he delayed signing would be an hour we spent preparing the criminal complaint. The evidence was irrefutable. Any lawyer worth their fee would tell him to sign. I watched something break in Marcus then. The charm disappeared. The mask fell away. What was left was smaller somehow, diminished. He asked how I'd found out, his voice barely a whisper. I told him it didn't matter. What mattered was that he'd underestimated me that he'd left a trail of evidence a child could follow, that he'd gotten lazy and arrogant and sloppy. That had been his first mistake. His second was thinking I'd care more about avoiding embarrassment than protecting myself. Rachel placed the papers in front of him, a pen on top. Uncle James and my mother would serve as witnesses. Everything legal and binding and permanent. Marcus picked up the pen. His hand was shaking. He looked at the papers for a long moment, and I could see him trying to find a loophole, an escape hatch, anything. Then he signed. Every page. His signature getting messier as he went, like he was falling apart one letter at a time. He finished. Rachel collected the papers, checked each signature, and nodded to Uncle James. It was done. I told Marcus he could start packing tonight or tomorrow, but everything had to be gone within 48 hours. If he left anything behind, I'd donate it. He was not to contact me except through Rachel regarding the financial repayments. He stood up like a man walked toward the bedroom, then stopped and turned back. He said my name. There was something in his voice. Regret, shock at how he'd lost. I didn't respond, just watched him disappear into what used to be our bedroom to pack up the pieces of his life. Then I turned to my sister. Sloan hadn't moved from her chair. She was still crying, quietly now, her face in her hands. When I said her name, she looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. She tried to apologize. The words came out in broken sobs. She was sorry, so sorry. She never meant for it to happen. She knew it was wrong. She loved me. She didn't know what she was thinking. My mother stood up then. I'd never seen her look at anyone the way she looked at Sloan in that moment, with complete and utter contempt. Mom told Sloan she had 1 hour to pack her things, that she was no longer welcome in this family, that the daughter she'd raised wouldn't have done what Sloan did, which meant the person sitting in front of us was a stranger. Sloan turned to me desperately, begged me to understand, to give her another chance. She said Marcus had pursued her, that she'd tried to resist, that it had just gotten out of control. I let her finish, let her say everything she needed to say. Then I told her the truth, that I'd read every email, that I knew she'd been the one pushing for more, asking him when he'd leave me, planning our future while living in my home, that she'd participated willingly and enthusiastically in destroying me. The money she'd received from Marcus, she had 30 days to return it. After that, I never wanted to see her or hear from her again. She wasn't my sister anymore. That person died the moment she decided my husband was worth more than our relationship. Sloan left the room sobbing, drawers opening and closing, the sound of her throwing things into bags. Less than an hour later, both of them were gone from my apartment. Marcus with 3 suitcases and a box of office supplies. Sloan with her 2 bags and a face so destroyed by crying, she looked unrecognizable. The door closed behind them, and the silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. Mom pulled me close, and this time I let myself cry. Not for them, for the version of my life that had died today, for the innocence I'd never get back. But underneath the grief was something else. Relief. And the first stirring of something that felt almost like freedom. The first week after they left was the hardest. I'd wake up expecting to hear Marcus in the shower or smell coffee. The apartment felt too big, too quiet, haunted by the ghost of a marriage that had never really existed. Rachel called daily to check on me. The divorce was moving faster than usual. Marcus had signed everything without contest, desperate to avoid criminal charges. His lawyer had contacted her once, trying to negotiate the repayment terms, but Rachel had shut that down immediately. The terms weren't negotiable. I threw myself into work because it was the only thing that made sense. Numbers, projections, problems I could actually solve. My team at the pharmaceutical company noticed I was different, sharper, colder, more efficient. My boss mentioned in passing that whatever was going on in my personal life, it was making me a better director. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry at that. Mom came down from Hartford every weekend for a month. She'd bring groceries, cook meals I barely touched, and sit with me while I went through the apartment removing every trace of Marcus. photos, his stupid collection of vintage whiskey bottles, the watch I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. Threw it all away. Every single thing. But it was the small discoveries that gutted me. Finding a receipt for lingerie in his jacket pocket. Lingerie I'd never received. A hotel room service bill tucked in a book on his nightstand from a weekend he'd told me he was at a conference. Evidence of a double life I'd been too trusting to see. 3 weeks after the confrontation, the first payment arrived in my account. $63,000 from Marcus's private account, returned in full. Rachel called to confirm receipt and told me the second payment, the $34,000 from Sloan, was due in another week. I asked Rachel if she'd heard anything about either of them. She hesitated, then told me Marcus had moved in with a colleague temporarily and Sloan had gone back to New York. That was all she knew. I told myself I didn't care where they were or what they were doing, but late at night, alone in my apartment, I'd catch myself wondering if they were still together, if they thought it was worth it, if they ever felt even a fraction of the pain they'd caused me. The answer came unexpectedly during my Thursday morning coffee run. I was standing in line at the cafe near my office when I heard a familiar voice turned around and found myself face to face with Jessica Chen, Marcus's former business partner. We'd always been friendly. She'd been to our apartment for dinner parties, holiday gatherings. The look on her face when she saw me was pure pity. She asked how I was doing, her voice careful, like I might shatter if she spoke too loudly. Told her I was fine. Great. Work was going well. She nodded, but didn't look convinced. Then she leaned in closer and told me something that made my blood run cold. She'd heard through mutual contacts that Marcus was struggling. His business was falling apart because several major clients had dropped him after hearing rumors about the divorce. Apparently word had gotten around about why we split. Not from me. I'd told no one outside my immediate family and Rachel, but someone had talked. And in Boston's tight professional circles, that kind of scandal spread fast. Jessica said she felt bad for him at first, until she ran into him at a networking event 2 weeks ago. He'd been drunk, bitter, and talking about how I'd ruined his life, how I'd turned everyone against him, how the divorce settlement was unfair, and his lawyer had told him he had no case because I'd manipulated the evidence. I just stared at her. Marcus was rewriting history again, making himself the victim. But Jessica wasn't finished. She told me the really interesting part. She'd seen Marcus at that same event with a woman. Not Sloan, someone else. A client's assistant, young and impressed by his smooth talking. He'd moved on already. Or maybe he'd never really been invested in Sloan at all. Maybe my sister had just been convenient. Available. Another conquest. I thanked Jessica for telling me and got my coffee in a daze. Sat in my car for 10 minutes trying to process it. If Marcus had already moved on to someone else, that meant Sloan had blown up her life, destroyed our relationship, for a man who didn't even really want her. She'd been just as used as I was. The thought should have given me satisfaction. Instead, it just made me sad. That evening, my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Sloan. Her voice was small, broken. She asked if I'd received the money. She just transferred the $34,000 that morning, borrowed from a friend because she didn't have it herself. I confirmed I'd gotten it. There was a long silence. Then she asked if we could talk. Really talk. She said she'd made the biggest mistake of her life, and she understood if I never forgave her, but she needed me to know she was sorry. I told her I'd gotten her apology, and then I told her the truth. That Marcus was already seeing someone else. That she'd destroyed our family for a man who discarded her the moment things got difficult. The sound she made was somewhere between a sob and a gasp. She hadn't known. Part of me, a small, petty part, was glad she was, but most of me just felt empty. I told her we were done, that the money was returned and the debt was, but our relationship couldn't be repaired. That some betrayals don't get second chances. She cried and begged, but I'd already made my decision. I hung up and blocked her number. That night, I opened a bottle of wine and sat on my balcony overlooking Boylston. The city lights sparkled below, people going about their lives, unaware of the small tragedy that had played out in my apartment. For the first time since that awful Wednesday afternoon, I felt something other than pain or anger. I felt free. The marriage was over. The betrayal was exposed. The people who'd hurt me were facing consequences. And I was still more than standing. I was ready to start rebuilding. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a call that one last time Detective Lisa Moreno with the Boston Police Department's finance. She asked if I had time to come down to the station to answer some questions about Marcus Hale, my ex-husband. My stomach dropped. I asked what this was about, trying to keep my voice steady. She told me they were investigating him for fraud. Multiple fraud cases, actually. That my name had come up in their investigation and they needed to verify I met with Detective Moreno that afternoon. She was sharp, professional, mid-40s with kind eyes that had probably seen every type of scam imaginable. She sat me down in a small interview room and pulled out a thick file. Apparently, I wasn't Marcus's only victim. Over the past 4 years, he'd been running a sophisticated investment scheme through his consulting business. He'd convince clients, mostly older couples planning for retirement, to let him manage their portfolios. He'd show them impressive returns on paper, but the money was never actually invested. He was running a Ponzi scheme, using new clients' money to pay fake returns to earlier clients. The whole thing had started to collapse around the same time our marriage ended. Clients were asking to withdraw funds, and Marcus couldn't pay them. That's when people started filing complaints. Detective Moreno showed me bank records, dates that lined up with our marriage, money moving through accounts I'd never known about. She asked if I'd had any knowledge of his business practices. I told her the truth. I'd been completely in the dark. I'd trusted him, believed he was a legitimate financial consultant. The irony wasn't lost on me that while I'd been funding our life, he'd been stealing from vulnerable people. She asked about the money he'd taken from our joint account. I showed her the documentation Rachel had prepared, the repayment records. Detective Moreno made notes, then looked up at me with something like sympathy. She told me I should know that Marcus had been arrested that morning, that he was facing federal charges for wire fraud, money laundering, and securities fraud, that he could be looking at 10 to 15 years in prison. The room tilted slightly. Whatever I'd wanted, justice, revenge, consequences, this was bigger than anything I'd imagined. Detective Moreno asked if I'd be willing to testify if the case went to trial, about his character, his pattern of deception, the way he'd hidden financial information from me. I said yes, without hesitation. She thanked me and walked me out. As I left the police station, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Sloan. The message was short. "Did you know about what he was doing? The fraud?" I stared at the text for a long moment, then blocked the number without responding. Whatever Sloan was going through, whatever guilt or fear or regret she felt, it wasn't my problem anymore. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all those people Marcus had scammed. Retirees who'd trusted him with their life savings. People who'd probably worked their whole lives for that money, only to have it stolen by a charming liar. I'd lost my husband and my sister, but they'd lost their futures. The next morning, I called Detective Moreno back and asked if there was anything else I could do to help. She told me the victims would appreciate knowing they weren't alone, that even Marcus's wife had been deceived. She gave me the contact information for one of the victims' advocacy groups. That evening, I attended a meeting in a community center in Cambridge. There were 12 people there, couples mostly, some individuals. All of them had trusted Marcus with their money. All of them had been destroyed. An older woman named Patricia was the first to speak. She talked about how Marcus had come recommended by a friend, how professional he'd seemed, how he'd shown her and her husband projections for their retirement that looked so promising. They'd given him $200,000, their entire retirement fund. When they'd tried to withdraw it last month, he'd stalled, made excuses, eventually stopped returning calls. They had nothing left. Patricia's husband Tom sat beside her, hollow-eyed and silent. He looked like he'd aged a decade in a month. One by one, people shared their stories. Marcus had taken everything from them: life savings, college funds, money that was supposed to pay for medical treatments, for grandchildren's education, for dreams they'd worked 40 years to achieve. The total he'd stolen was over $2 million. When it was my turn to speak, I introduced myself as Marcus's ex-wife. There was a ripple of recognition, some murmurs. I told them I hadn't known about the fraud until after our divorce, that I'd been investigating him for infidelity and financial abuse when the police contacted. But I also told them something I hadn't admitted to anyone, barely to myself. I said there had been signs, small things I'd ignored or explained away. The way Marcus would get defensive when I asked about his work, how he never wanted to discuss his clients in detail, the expensive purchases that didn't quite match his claimed income, the private accounts I wasn't supposed to know about. I'd been so focused on trusting him, on being a good wife, that I'd blinded myself to the red flags waving right in front of me. Patricia looked at me and told me it wasn't my fault, that con artists are experts at deception, that even professionals get But I couldn't shake the feeling that if I'd been paying attention, if I'd been less trusting and more vigilant, maybe I could have stopped him sooner. Maybe some of these people wouldn't be sitting here tonight, their lives in ruins. After the meeting, several people came up to thank me for attending, for being willing to testify, for proving that Marcus fooled everyone, even the person closest to him. Tom, Patricia's husband, shook my hand and told me something that stuck with me. He said that what Marcus did to me was worse in some ways than what he did to them. They'd lost they still had I'd lost trust in the person I'd promised to build a life. That kind of betrayal I drove home that night thinking about all the different ways Marcus had destroyed lives. The clients he'd scammed, the wife, the sister-in-law he'd manipulated. Each of us thinking we were special to him, that we mattered, when really we were just marks in his long con. 3 weeks later, Marcus took a plea deal, pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence, 12 years in federal prison, full restitution to all victims, though the prosecutors admitted most people would likely never see their money back. It was gone, spent on his lifestyle, his affair, his other secrets. I didn't attend the sentencing, didn't need to see his face again. Rachel went on my behalf and reported back. Marcus had looked small in his prison jumpsuit, broken. He'd tried to make a statement about how sorry he was, but the judge had cut him off. Sloan tried to contact me one more time after the sentence. She sent a letter to my office. Must have asked someone for the address. The envelope sat on my desk for 3 days before I opened it. Inside, she'd written pages of apology. How she'd been stupid and selfish. How Marcus had manipulated her too. Made her think he loved her. How she'd lost everything. Her family, her self-respect, her sense of who she was. She said she understood if I never, but she needed me to know that every day she woke up and regretted what she'd done, that she'd give anything to go back as. The letter ended with a single question. Did I think we could ever find our way back to being sisters again? I read it twice, then put it in my shredder. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt, and I wasn't interested in trying. 18 months after that Wednesday afternoon, when I saw Marcus's face on my sister's phone, I stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling window in my new office and watched the sunset over Boston Harbor. Vice President of Operations. The promotion had come through 3 months ago, along with a significant raise and a corner office that made my old workspace look like a closet. My boss told me I'd earned it, that my performance over the past year had been exceptional, that I'd brought a new level of strategic thinking to the department. He didn't know was that surviving betrayal had taught me something invaluable about business. I'd learned to trust data over charm, to verify instead of assume, to protect myself while still taking calculated risks. Those lessons made me better at my job than I'd ever been when I was trying to balance a marriage with a career. The divorce had freed me in ways I never expected. I still thought about that day sometimes. The moment I picked up Sloane's phone and saw my husband's face. How my hands had trembled as I took those screenshots. The ice-cold clarity that had flooded through me, shutting down the panic so I could think, survive. That moment had changed me fundamentally. I wasn't the same woman blindly and loved without question. The new version of me was harder, more cautious, but she was also stronger, more honest with herself, less willing to accept anything less than what she deserved. My phone buzzed on the desk behind me. A text from Aaron. Aaron Castellano. I'd met him 6 months ago at a charity gala my company sponsored. He was a cardiologist at Mass General, brilliant and kind, with laugh lines around his eyes and a straightforward way of speaking that I found refreshing after years of Marcus's calculated charm. Our first date had been coffee, intentionally casual. I'd told him on that first meeting that I was divorced, that it had been ugly, that I wasn't sure I was ready for anything serious. He'd listened without judgment and told me he appreciated the honesty, that we could take things as slowly as I needed. We'd been dating for 5 months now. He'd met my mother last month. She'd approved, which meant more to me than I'd expected. He knew about Marcus, about the affair, and the fraud prison sentence. I'd laid it all out one evening over dinner, giving him every reason to run. Instead, he'd reached across the table and taken my hand, told me that what happened to me wasn't a reflection of who I was, that being betrayed didn't make me damaged or less worthy of love, that if anything, surviving it made me stronger. His text asked if I was still on for dinner tonight. There was a new Italian place in the North End he wanted to try. I smiled and texted back that I'd meet him there at 7. As I gathered my things to leave the office, my assistant knocked on the door. She had something for me, a package that had been delivered to reception. No return address, just my name. I took it back to my desk and opened it carefully. Inside was a book, a leather-bound journal, expensive and beautiful. Tucked inside the front cover was a note in handwriting I recognized instantly, my mother's. The note was brief. For the next chapter, love, Mom. I opened the journal to the first page. It was blank, waiting to be filled. A fresh start, new story. I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The betrayal, the evidence gathering, the confrontation, the divorce, Marcus's arrest and conviction, Sloane's banishment from the family, the slow, painful process of rebuilding myself. There were things I'd lost that I'd never get back. The innocence of believing people were the relationship with my sister, whatever that had been, forever. Years I'd invested in a marriage that was nice. But there were things I learned that I was strong, that I could stand. That being nice and trusting didn't mean being weak, but it did mean being selective about who deserved that trust. I'd learned that family wasn't just about blood. Rachel, my mother, Uncle James, they'd shown up for me when I needed them most. And now Aaron, carefully earning his place in my life through consistent honesty and respect. I'd learned that the best revenge wasn't destruction. It was reconstruction, building a life so full and successful that the people who'd betrayed me became footnotes in my story instead of the main plot. Marcus was in prison. Sloane was alone in New York, cut off from the family she'd destroyed. And I was here, promoted and thriving, with a man who actually deserved me waiting to take me to dinner. The universe had a funny way of balancing the scales. I packed up the journal to take home. Maybe I'd write in it someday. Maybe I'd document this whole experience, not as a wound to pick at, but as evidence of survival. Proof that you can be broken and still heal, that you can be betrayed and still learn to trust again, and wisely. My phone buzzed again. This time it was from Patricia, the woman from the victims support group. She checked in every few weeks, and I'd started doing the same. She and Tom were slowly rebuilding. They'd both gone back to work, were living more modestly, but they had each other. She thanked me again for testifying at the trial, said it had meant everything to see Marcus's ex-wife stand up and tell the truth. I texted back that she didn't need to keep thanking me, that we'd all survived him, and that was what mattered. As I walked out of my office and through the pharmaceutical company's sleek lobby, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. I looked different than I had 18 months, sharper, more self-possessed. There was a confidence in my posture that hadn't been there. That woman who'd taken the screenshot and stayed calm while her world imploded. She'd saved me, and the woman I'd become was someone I drove to the North End thinking about how some people don't deserve them, but how forgiveness isn't always how you can acknowledge that something terrible happened and still refuse to let it define you. Aaron was waiting outside the restaurant when I arrived, his face lighting up when he saw me. No games, no hidden agendas, just genuine happiness to see me. We went inside and ordered wine and pasta, and somewhere between the appetizers and the main course, he asked me about my day. I told him about the promotion becoming official, about the new responsibilities I'd be taking on. He raised his glass and toasted to my success, told me he was proud of me, that he knew how hard I'd worked for this. And I believed him, not because I was naive, but because he'd earned that belief through months of consistency and transparency. After dinner, walking along the waterfront with the city lights reflecting on the harbor, Aaron asked me something unexpected. He said he'd been thinking about taking a trip this summer, maybe somewhere I'd never been. Asked if I'd want to go with him. A year ago, the question would have terrified me. The vulnerability of planning a future with someone, even something as simple as a vacation. But tonight, I found myself saying yes, because I'd learned the most important lesson of all. Hurt doesn't mean you stop living. It means you live more carefully, more intentionally, with better boundaries and clearer vision. Marcus and Sloane had taken a lot from, but they hadn't taken everything. They hadn't broken me. In the end, that was their biggest failure. I'd survived. I'd rebuilt. And I was finally, truly free. As we walked back to our cars, I thought about that screenshot still saved in my cloud storage. The evidence that had started everything. I'd kept it, not as a reminder of, but as a reminder of my own strength, of the moment I chose to save myself instead of falling apart. That was the real story. Not the betrayal, but the survival. Not what they did to me, but what I did for myself. And if you're reading this from wherever you are in the world, maybe you're in a similar situation, maybe you're just listening to a stranger's story, I want you to know this. When everything falls apart, you get to choose what you build from the pieces. You get to decide whether the worst thing that happened or just a painful chapter in a much longer story. I chose to keep going, keep building, trusting, keep loving. And if you've made it this far in my story, you'll choose the same for yourself. You deserve honesty and loyalty and love that doesn't if you haven't accept less. Don't ignore the red flags temporary, but giving your life to someone who doesn't, to second chances with the right people, to screenshot moments that change everything, and to the strength we find when we're forced to save ourselves. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city in the comments below. And if you want to make sure you don't miss other stories like this, stories about survival and strength and starting over, go ahead and subscribe. Sometimes we all need to hear that we're not alone in what we've been through. Thank you for walking through this with me, for being the friend I needed while I told this story. Here's to all of us who took the screenshot, stayed calm, and saved ourselves. We're still standing, and that's everything.